Pride, yeah, one of the 7 deadly sins, right?
Yeah.
Along with gluttony, lust. What's the other ones?
Avarice
Avarice,
is, I think, actually greed, if I remember right. Yeah.
greed, lust, pride, gluttony,
Envy.
envy.
Envy
How is
is
envy just not greed though?
greed. I think greed is for your own sake. Like if you just
What? And envy is you want to take it away from someone else or something?
well, you sort of, it's more like you don't want anyone to have it.
Hmm.
And that's why like I remember reading something where they said like envy is the only one that like is not even fun for you.
Hmm.
Like there's literally no one that benefits from envy because like it's not helping other people. It's not helping you either. So there's like not even any upside really. Like the other ones, like if you're, I don't know, pulling off gluttony or something, you're at least sort of having a good time.
Are you though? I don't know. It feels like one of those like self-destructive, like, I don't know.
I think I think you'd have a good time in the moment, at least with gluttony. But
Did you watch 7?
yeah.
The gluttony guy did not seem to be having a good time.
Yeah.
The spaghetti scene, right?
But I guess that's a bit of a torture scene. But if you're just like having a normal gluttonous time, I think you'd probably have a short-term good time.
Short-term good time.
But you might regret it. But I mean, with envy, like you're just like literally no one's having a good time. No one is having any.
Like envy is like spite, basically, right? Like spitefulness.
But it sort of hurts you almost more than it hurts other people, I guess. I mean, I guess it sort of hurts them if you're like if you're feeling less than friendly towards them. But
is that the idea that all of these things like hurt everyone?
Well, some of them presumably all hurt other people as well, but envy is like the one that's kind of doesn't seem to have any upshot, I guess.
Like, yeah, like why is lust on there? That kind of doesn't make much sense either, I think.
Well, that
seems just like cultural bias or something, right?
Yeah, that's one way where you could, some of them I think you could flip into virtues of a kind if you thought about it that way. But again, sort of like except for envy, I guess, because it's kind of hard to reframe it as any sort of upside or any sort of positive, really. I mean, there's not much way in which it really benefits anyone or anything.
They say the difference between envy and jealousy is that like envy's like cold and like steely, but jealousy's like fiery and passionate. Just thought that was an interesting distinction to draw.
It could be, yeah. That's one way to look at it as well. Yeah, I mean, I guess you could look at it as a spur to activity of a kind, maybe. I mean, I guess if it gets you to take action, then maybe it might have some upside.
Envy?
Yeah.
I guess, yeah. You could look at it that way.
I mean, if you're motivated enough to sort of detach yourself and try to do something or try to get something, then maybe could be helpful.
Yeah.
But it's still a bit of a downer, I guess. Bit of a not much immediate upside or positive.
Yeah. Pride's an annoying one though, for sure. I mean, like refusal to apologize, basically, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's another situation where we're just talking about a friendship that kind of collapsed because of, well, yeah, sort of pride, I guess, and maybe kind of shame in a way. It not being able to.
Those are kind of the two. It's actually the same emotion, maybe, right? It's like one's expressed outward, the other one's inward.
Yeah. Well, I mean, pride could be sort of an overcompensation for shame. I guess. I mean, it's getting a bit therapeutic, but that sort of is the idea with like clinical narcissism, where it's like a overcompensation. So it's not that you actually have this incredible view of yourself. It's that you're like almost trying to convince yourself that you do.
By convincing everyone around you, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're trying to put on a show to like convince others so you can convince yourself.
Right.
But you don't actually have that view. And I think it's almost, most of the time, it's almost like the opposite. Like you have a very unstable view of yourself, or you have a very low view of yourself. So you're trying to overcompensate by creating this, larger than life persona.
Yeah.
No resemblance to current political figures should be inferred from this, or
purely coincidental.
Purely coincidental.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess pride and shame could sort of be, the former could sort of be a overcompensation for the latter.
Two sides of the same coin, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was another one like that? Oh, anxiety and excitement. I think I mentioned that too a while back, right?
Well, excitement is sort of a form of anxiety, I guess.
But it's like, it's very like glass half full versus glass half empty type thing. Like it's literally just a framing of an emotion, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess anxiety is a form of excitement in a way. I mean, it's sort of a nervous excitement, maybe you could say. Someone was mentioning this in one of the chats too, like we were saying something about desire. Oh, I think I said something. Desire is always kind of bordering like fear in a way. So it's not really clear that you could have a desire that is like purely, I mean, I guess we were talking about desire in the context of, relationships or being attracted to people. I think without that element of kind of fear, it's a little bit unclear if there could be really strong desire.
Without the element of fear, if there could be strong desire. Yeah. Well, so I think this was a quote you shared a while back. Fill me in who said this originally, but it was like no hope equals no fear, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
But that's like kind of saying like don't have hopes and then you won't be fearful, right?
Yeah. So that's another quote where if you rotate it, you could look at it as a motivator to action, or you could look at it as a description of kind of a hopeless situation, in the negative sense, right? If there's no hope, then you don't really have to worry about much. But at the
Isn't that like liberating though? That's how I interpreted that quote. That basically like if you let go of hope, then you have nothing to fear, right?
Yeah,
because
but
there's just the action.
You're also going to be. You might also be in a pretty mindless and unsatisfying place where you might not have much anxiety, but you might not also push towards anything in a way.
So you think that you need the stick to draw you in, basically, right?
Well,
into action.
Yeah, any kind of conscious attempt to change circumstances, I think, is always going to create that, create kind of a, well, probably. I was talking about this with one of my teachers, Keith, recently. I mentioned a bunch of times before.
Yeah.
And we're kind of, there's usually this like initial burst of interest in something, or like initial enthusiasm or initial interest, where it seems like it's going to be really possible and everything's going to go well. And that's usually followed by just kind of total, almost like sense of failure. Like, oh, actually, like I can't really seem to do this, or it doesn't seem to be working, or I don't seem to be able to sustain it. Right.
Yeah.
And then if you can make it through that, then that's when the actual sort of new
Yeah,
progress or
yeah.
state
Well,
comes.
it's the classic, like it's what the valley of despair.
Yeah, yeah,
Is that
yeah,
what it's
yeah,
called? But yeah, I mean, very common
yeah,
sort of progress
yeah,
kind of illustration.
yeah. And he was mentioning it as like the Yao or IAO formula, which is Isis, Apophis, and then Osiris, and kind of an occult way of looking at it, but just kind of that sense of, yeah, like initial, I guess, like warmth or enthusiasm, and then some kind of disaster or devastation, and then
Mm,
kind of like actual, I think we're back kind of energy
mm, mm,
where
mm,
you kind of actually get it done or actually move into that new routine or
mm, mm.
new phase or whatever.
What dictates how fast, or is speed kind of irrelevant here because it's just kind of a fractal that you apply
Yeah.
either to a long running goal or
I wish I knew. I mean, I really don't have a good answer for that. I
mm,
mean, I think some things have some new habits or some new forms of discipline have seems to come up pretty quick. I mean,
mm,
it feels like you can get burned out in a month or so or even less, whereas
mm,
you might have some initial burst of energy or burst of enthusiasm.
mm.
Um,
Just kind of depends on the nature of the goal, I
yeah,
guess,
yeah.
right? Nature of the
And
task.
he was talking about he posted something recently where he was talking about what he called PMA or positive mental attitude, which
Mm,
which sounds like a very new agey kind of wishy washy term. Um, but I think from what I can make out, he was defining it as actually just the ability to persist in face of those like disasters.
yeah.
Whereas like most people would probably just, or at least a lot of people would probably just be like, yeah, nah, that wasn't for me, or
Mm,
it's not going to work, or I should just do what I'm good at or stay in my zone or
yeah, yeah.
something. So I think he was defining positive as a sense of like, well, I'm gonna continue even though it like
Mm,
really viscerally sucks,
yeah,
or like
yeah,
it's like
yeah.
not only is it not fun, but it sucks, and I'm like not even feeling any effect or
Yeah,
motivation
yeah, yeah.
or enjoyment or progress or like anything,
It's funny how that's like a separate skill from whatever else you're doing,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that ability to, and he was talking, we were kind of talking about this in lots of different contexts, kind of like occult work or more kind of like esoteric stuff, yoga stuff like Raja yoga stuff,
Mm,
and even just like normal, gym work or gym
mm,
routine or like physical training kind of stuff.
mm,
So seems to be kind of the same pattern
mm,
across the board. And he did interestingly link them together. Like you said, the physical training stuff, the gym work stuff actually is the basis of the more esoteric kind
mm.
of occult stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so in Prometheus Rising terms, again, it's like you're training essentially your first circuit consciousness, and
Yeah.
then everything kind of stems from there.
Yeah.
So training the biosurvival, kind of
Yeah.
low
Um,
biosurvival, yeah.
yeah. Or just seeing, I think kind of, uniting the planes or seeing the,
Mm,
as above, so
yeah,
below in a sense
yeah,
with this where,
yeah.
I think there's a tendency for people to see, occultism as being something completely sort of like feeling based or just emotion based or inspiration based rather than comparing it to like a gym routine or something.
Mm,
But he always, that's what I like about, or I love about Keith, is he always does that. He always just compares it to like, using kettlebells or something.
mm,
Um, which seems to map very closely onto my own understanding of it and my own experience of it. rather than just going off on some, flight of fancy or something. So yeah, he's always stressing, things have to be done exactly as described. They have to be done every day. Doesn't matter what you feel like. You have to do it exactly every day. You have to keep doing this. Right. Which, I would say again, it does seem to be the case.
Well, it's the case with anything that you're trying to like improve that way, right?
Yeah.
Like, I for me lately, it's been the hip stretching stuff, which again, like if you start skipping days, then you're just right back where you started, basically.
Yeah.
It is interesting to be able to go down to that level. Start actually like feeling, oh, there's more space to move around in. Right?
Yeah.
But like, what specifically in occultism have like? Is it just the whole practice? You need to do it daily, or?
I think you need to do it daily to enable things or unlock things which, again, might seem more in the fanciful realm at first. Whether this is things like astral experience or invocation, evocation. I think if you create that foundation of routines, which again, at first, maybe you're not even sure why you're doing certain things, or it might seem completely pointless or disconnected. Could be memorizing things, could be memorizing correspondences, could be doing certain daily rituals where you're like, why am I doing this? Like, I don't really see the point. But just staying on it and just continuing to do it, I think creates that foundation for the other more elaborate stuff to kind of actually fall into place. Like, you're kind of building your temple from the ground up. But again, until you really build those kind of brute foundations, then you can't even really think about, like, well, what's the interior design going to be like, or who's going to show up to the temple, or who's going to.
It's very nuts and boltsy, basically.
Yeah. So if you don't have that hard nuts and bolts kind of architectural foundation stuff, then you're not even going to get to the actual purpose of the temple, right? Because you're literally not even going to have a temple, right? So if you don't build it sort of with your own hands, so to speak, or build it yourself from the ground up, then you're not going to have it to use, I guess, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. On the ground level, not occult related necessarily, but yoga related, yogic breathing.
Yeah.
What's it called? On
pranayama.
Yeah, pranayama, right?
Well, yoga, that stuff is like, that is occultism.
Yeah.
And as weird as that sounds, because I think there's this idea that yoga is just like stretching, which.
But so what was Crowley's thing? It was left hand, right hand, kind of yoga's left hand.
Well, he described it almost like a spectrum where like one end of the spectrum is yoga and the other end is magic. So it's sort of like, it's almost like introversion versus extroversion or something. So at least as far as I understand it, I need to read more deeply in this. I mean, he did release a book called 8 Lectures on Yoga, where he goes into this more deeply. But from what I've understood, he was saying that yoga is about removal, like subtraction, whereas magic is like addition. And he also said something like, all of his success in yoga was made possible by his magical experience. And a good deal of his later success in magic was made possible by his yoga experience. So it's like the tools that sort of like the keys he needed in yoga were found in magic, and the keys he needed in magic were found in yoga.
Mm-hmm.
Which again, I think if people don't know what he was specifically talking about, it's maybe sort of hard to understand that, because you're like, what kind of yoga was he talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, because he certainly wasn't talking about like sitting on a mat and stretching.
Yeah. So like what it's been like for me with the hip opening and also the pranayama, like it seems to be essentially I don't know, like interacting with your nervous system, basically, right?
Yeah.
So something I learned recently, learned, I guess it was articulated to me, was that breathing is the only involuntary thing that we can also assume full voluntary control over. Right? Like no other bodily function really is like that. No involuntary bodily function, like digestion.
Well, I suppose you could
right?
affect your heartbeat by
breathing, right?
Well, you could. I guess you could think about very either exciting
like anxious
things
or something,
or anxious things. Like if you suddenly became very mentally stimulated, your heartbeat might increase.
Yeah, it's a point. Yeah.
So I guess
there might be more.
Not that I'm trying to I'm not trying to nitpick this, but I mean I just think there is an element of that maybe with.
But I guess like full control over might be like you can't control your heartbeat like tick tick tick, right?
You can't
like you can speed up or slow it down,
but you can't really.
But breathing, you can like fully control it, right? It's interesting. Like one of the techniques is like alternate nostril breathing. Are you familiar with this one?
Yeah.
But the idea is basically like one of your nostrils is like linked to your parasympathetic nervous system, and then the other is like sympathetic. So it's like one is more energizing, the other is more rest and digest. And so you breathe in through one, exhale through the other, breathe in through the other, exhale through the first, right? And just repeat that. And there is a very distinct effect, right? So I've been trying a variety of different techniques, right? There's also just kind of like inhale, hold your breath for 30 seconds, and then let it go. And that like relaxes you basically. Like you can fall asleep after that, essentially, right? But it's interesting to see that there's actually distinct differences between these different breathing practices. Like they do affect your nervous system in different ways.
Well, Crowley made some pretty I want to say like OP remarks about pranayama, like almost to the effect.
Yeah, he was saying like everyone should do it, basically, right? Well, it was like the key, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, he says something like it would. I'm trying to remember the exact wording. I mean, I have to.
I think this was in Prometheus Rising again. Like
maybe yeah. I'd have to
swear it was.
I'd have to source the quote, but he says something to the effect that it was like basically the solution to all problems or something, or like you could. Any sort of mental issue or any sort of worry you could just deal with pranayama, which again is sounds kind of OP for something which again seems somewhat obscure, but I think that's why I remembered that. I was like, really? Like, wow, what I mean,
I mean, like especially in the last few days, I felt like doing Wim Hof in the morning is like the best part of my day. Like I feel the most like release of energy at that point, and like even my thinking, the way I'm like thinking about stuff, like all of a sudden like barriers fall away and stuff. It's very bizarre. But yeah, I mean, it kind of calls into question, I guess, like how much of life is just you battling your nervous system, right? And if you can control it, then maybe like you can do quite a bit, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's what he meant by subtraction with yoga in a way is I mean the
getting
word,
rid of obstacles basically, right?
Well, Yeah, or I think the word actually means just like yoking, like yoking a oxen or putting it under control, right?
Okay. Ah, yeah, yeah.
So
Interesting.
yeah, I think that's what
Well,
yoga
again, yeah. So reining in your nervous. Yeah.
reining in your nerves, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so again, I think for what this means practically, if people are not familiar with this, or again, if they're still visualizing like, women in yoga pants, sitting on yoga mats or stretching or something. I don't think it's that couldn't be a part of it, but it's more that the physical aspect is just sort of like a crutch for the mental aspects. So from what I can uh, work out from what I've read is that it's sort of the point of assuming the asanas or the postures is to just assume a very unnatural and uncomfortable posture and then just remain there, because then you can't really like escape, I guess.
Mm.
Like you can't distract yourself, you can't really like you know look at your phone, you can't really like you know listen to music,
But
you
so,
can't
like,
really
what poses this?
well, any of these, I think they're called asanas, which are like
Can you describe it?
certain postures. I mean, sitting with your leg out one way, or like sitting in a kind of deliberately unnatural or uncomfortable position, which over time is probably even going to become kind of painful.
But so, like, are you stretching? Like, is
No,
it working on some kind of muscle
I think
group?
you're just basically remaining completely still in that position for
But
like 2 hours or something,
mm,
without moving at all, like without doing any kind of breaking that posture,
yeah, I mean,
regardless of how you feel.
sounds like a very, I guess, goal task specific style of yoga, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you're doing this, then you're doing it because of, I guess, the mental challenge or
Yeah,
the state
yeah,
that
yeah,
results in overcoming the
yeah,
mental challenge, right?
yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, so there's tons of like schools of yoga, essentially,
Yeah,
right?
I think the one he was coming from was Raja Yoga,
Mm,
which is Vivekananda, if I remember right. I think that was mostly what he was trained in. I think in Sri Lanka, if I remember right.
mm,
Um, so yeah, there's different approaches to it, different schools. But that's at least my present understanding of it is that he was deliberately assuming certain postures for very extended periods of time and then just like remaining in them,
mm,
without breaking movement, regardless of, maybe having a cramp or something, or
mm-hmm.
some intense physical agony where you're just staying in it and letting it pass. And then you might suddenly feel euphoric and then you just let it pass,
Mm,
regardless of if you feel good, if you feel bad, you just don't break posture,
mm-hmm.
or, really let it determine anything.
Yeah. Sounds intense.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's sort of why not many people are doing it, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Have you ever tried to hold any of those poses or?
Um, briefly, I mean, again, I've been meaning to get to the actual book he wrote about this, which is called 8 Lectures on Yoga, I think.
Mhm.
Or, which, if I remember right, does include illustrations of the postures, and the big blue Liber ABA, which is the giant Crowley book where he kind of includes everything. Also is full of helpful illustrations, and I think actually just there were like photos they took where all of these postures are explained and kind of laid out what you're supposed to do. how you're supposed to sit, how you're supposed to stand, or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is not the yoga I'm practicing. I mean,
Yeah.
so there is that element of discomfort and that element
Mm.
of like battling your nervous system basically, right?
Mm.
And breathing to like
Yeah.
relax basically and to push past they call it like the stretch reflex, which
Right.
basically is your nervous system and muscles freaking out and trying to get you to
Yeah.
get out of the position
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you keep breathing, then like you relax and you can stay in the position.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
But I guess ultimately the goal is to like get past your nervous system and start like stretching your fascia or whatever, like start reshaping your muscles
Okay.
basically,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So haven't noticed too much like euphoria or anything,
Mm.
or it's just kind of miserable state that you try and modulate to be able to stay in the pocket and like not get out of the position, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah. What have you been reading lately?
Um. And I have been going over some of these magical texts in various ways, sort of. I mean, some of the things we were just talking about, kind of related to yoga, magic kind of things.
But you just have to
Um,
read it. You don't have to practice the yoga.
trying to get to practicing it,
Mm.
but again, working out what the actual technique is, I guess, is the
Mm.
first step
It's
of.
not on WikiHow or.
Yeah, I'm sure there's material available
Mm.
that would lay it out. Um, yeah, so I've been reading that and coming back to some Freud material. I was trying to figure out and process as well.
What Freud material?
Uh, there's one called Beyond the Pleasure Principle, which which is where he discusses the death drive,
Mm.
which is the idea which was, I guess, pretty controversial at the time. That there's like an anti-life instinct almost, um, or sort of like compulsions which, well, sort of like envy that we were just talking about. Like it's there, but it doesn't seem to help. It only seems to harm you and doesn't like really harm anyone else. It only harms you.
Mm.
So what, I guess the question that he was looking at in this is like, where is this coming from and what purpose could it possibly serve? Because it doesn't really seem to do anything good for the organism. And he was sort of looking at this in very like quasi scientific 19th century kind of ways where um he was looking at where the compulsion to repeat things comes from, which again is kind of noted in children if you really pay attention, because like
Mm.
little kids like want you to read the same storybook like exactly, just like over and
Mm.
over and
Yeah,
over
yeah.
again. Like it's not that you're like trying to make it more interesting or change it. They just want the exact same thing
Mm.
repeated exactly, like forever, right? So that's sort of part of it where he was starting to piece a lot of these sort of phenomena together of like, where do these certain repetition compulsions come from. And he was eventually trying to arrive at like, well, what is the goal of the organism? I mean, he comes out with this interesting statement that the goal or I guess the compulsion of the organism is to die under its own conditions. So,
Like conditions it defines basically,
well,
or.
yeah.
Mm.
So which again is kind of a weird way of initially looking at it, but if you think about it, well, all organisms seem to die, right?
Mm.
So the goal of any organism in a way is kind of death, right? But it's death of, old age, or,
Mm.
you know, if it's like a cell or something, death through division or
Yeah, I mean,
reproduction.
it's a weird, like it's like you're looking at the photo negative or something, because
Yeah.
like the commonly understood way to phrase it is that like the goal of any organism is survival, and death is
Yeah.
the inevitable
Yeah.
kind of
So he
end
he
of
traces
survival.
he traces that to sort of a very basic, like, cellular level, where if you look at like single cells or something, the reproduction and the death are not really clearly separable, because like if a cell divides,
Like, did the
it
cell die
did it
technically?
die?
Yeah.
Because it's not really the same cell. It split into two,
Hmm.
which then became something else. So even tracing it to that simple level, the reproduction is not necessarily different from the death in a way.
Hmm.
And I might be, I've been trying to reread this a few times, so I might be misinterpreting or misrepresenting some of this, but um, that's sort of where the ongoing theme of this comes up more, which is like, to what extent is the reproductive instincts kind of the same thing as the death drive, or like
Hmm.
what relationship do they share? Again, assuming these conditions, like assuming that the the goal of the organism is death, basically, in a way, um, and also analyzing these things which don't seem productive or helpful, or so again, the title of the essay is Beyond the Pleasure Principle. So by pleasure principle, it's just the idea that all of our most of our primitive motivations and behaviors are directed towards pleasure in a
Hmm.
way away from pain.
Hmm.
Um, but again, in terms of these like repetition compulsions, or other kinds of seemingly self-destructive behavior, um, it seems like there's some things which are not motivated by the pleasure principle.
Hmm.
So you're sort of looking at, well, why would that be the case, or like where would these, I guess, psychologically and kind of like biologically, like where
Hmm.
would these drives come from? So again, he's not really talking about desires, I guess. Like desires and drives are kind of different. Um, so it gets very speculative and vague towards the end, but he starts introducing this death drive idea, which got kind of picked up by some other later kind of psychologists or psychoanalysts, and kind of elaborated it into this like almost like anti-life or like anti-erotic kind of force, which supposedly exists, or is trying to return to simple conditions
Hmm.
from complex ones. So there's this like sort of tension where complex organisms are always sort of seeking a return to simplicity,
Hmm.
which is again sort of deterioration or death,
Hmm.
or a lack of complexity.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking earlier about your prideful friend, right?
Yeah.
And what drives someone to, um, yeah, like basically make themselves depressed, really,
Yeah.
right?
Well, that's
So that's
another.
kind of the
Yeah.
same thing, right?
Yeah, it is. Well, yeah. So suicidal impulses, like literal suicides.
I kind of feel like suicidal impulse is separate from like depression, though,
Yeah.
right?
Although there's an element where it's sort of the same. I mean, if you think of depression as being almost an absence of energy, which
Right.
it sort of is, because your energy or your will to really do anything seem kind of absent.
Mm.
So you could look at it sort of, I think, as being a anti-erotic drive or an
Well,
anti-life kind
depression.
of. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, so that's what I'm saying. But like suicide is like productive almost, right? Like, I mean, it's
Yeah, it's
like,
a weird form of production.
yeah.
It is a weird, unusual sort of form of production,
Mm.
which
So it's like, it's kind of quite separate from depression, I guess, if you think about it in those terms, right?
suicide. Yeah, well, it is. I guess you could look at it as completion of the drive in a sense.
Mm.
Um, so again, there's other. I think this is material that Freud himself was um, not fully understanding as he was writing about it, and he was looking for ways to sort of figure it out or cast some light on it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Did anyone like run with this and develop it
Oh yeah,
further?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's been developed and looked at in all kinds of unusual ways after it. By Lacan and Deleuze and Guattari and some other
Mm.
kind of uh, kind of writers who ran with this sort of material. Um, and the other thing with Freud is that again, I think he was living in a time and place where he couldn't really see a lot of these drives or these neuroses playing out in
In
he
himself or
well I think he was seeing them playing out in a very restricted form, at least until World War I
mm.
happened. I mean, there's a bit of a difference between, like some Viennese woman who's like sexually frustrated because no one is giving her satisfying sex versus like a military conflict with like new technology where people are massacring each other for
Mm.
apparently not terribly great reasons.
Yeah.
That's a lot harder to explain than the unsatisfied woman, which is in some ways, I guess, not terribly hard to explain, but
Mm.
explaining a world war or some other of these things is a lot harder to explain away
Right.
when there doesn't seem to be much immediate reason why it would
Mm.
ever happen, at least on
Mm.
paper. So I think Freud kind of died before he really could fully confront some of the darker material he was getting into
Mm.
towards the end of his life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, when he started, it was all just fun and cocaine and repressed
How it
sex and
started versus how it's
how it
going.
started. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, he was just starting out with the solution is more cocaine. The solution is uh, dealing with these sexual repressions, these
Mm.
complexes. Which is good, but cocaine may not actually be the answer.
Spoiler alert.
It may, yeah, may not be the
As much as it might try and convince
as
you
much as it might seem that way.
otherwise,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of riffing off the death drive. Saw this on Instagram today. I think you might have actually seen it too. But someone shared a post of it was like a new constitution. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Okay, yeah, yeah.
Um, but I don't know. It was just like basically it was saying man, I wish I could pull up the quote, but it'd take too long. It was basically like any attempt to like organize a military or like prepare for war is a crime because it's inhumane or something.
Yeah.
And like reading that, I was just kind of like, it's kind of the most human thing ever done, really. Like
Yeah.
it's
Well, that's one of the problems with I want to say like I want to call them like utopian impulses, which sound very good, and I don't think any reasonable person would instinctively disagree with them. Which again, and I think Freud was a very rational person. He described himself as a pacifist. I think he still very much did have faith that, reason and more knowledge, more reason, more awareness would just like take care of everything.
Yeah.
And I think the further you go into the 20th century, you obviously see that that's not the case, right?
I mean, is there more of that now compared to then? Like, I'm
More
almost
of,
like I don't think he's wrong necessarily. More awareness, more reason, and so on. Like, those are sort of the elements to transcendence, I suppose. But the thing is that they're hard to apply, basically, and people, you know,
yeah,
left to their own devices, they're not gonna
well,
like
yeah,
apply them,
but
right?
there's a lot of interesting alleys with this where one of the problems with that is that, sort of like we were saying earlier, with desire verging on fear, or not necessarily being separable from it. So if you create a seemingly, safe or non-military society, is it also going to be a completely sterile society
Mm,
where, well, like much like Japan, right?
mm,
So you've removed the military, uh, you've gotten
yeah.
rid of that, and what do you have? We have a population that's literally collapsing in
Mm.
massive rapid time.
Yeah, it's funny. Like just every month, there's a new headline of like
Well, yeah,
marriage rate, birth rate hits
yeah.
record low. Like,
So
yeah,
what I mean, I think again, you could trace this to, primates, or because the Jane Goodall experiments or research seems to reveal that the other primates do the exact same thing. So their reproduction cycle is also seemingly linked to kind of a warfare
mm,
cycle, where once they reach certain numbers, however smoothly they may have been working together
mm,
until then, a small group will break off and then form their own group, which, builds up a little power base somewhere else, and then returns to attack the previous group,
mm,
which was their friends, right?
mm,
And again, much like Freud, like I think Jane Goodall was looking at this and was like, "What the fuck? Like, why am I literally witnessing a war?" Like, I thought
mm,
these were like friendly, cute chimps that were, just like monkey people, basically.
mm,
Civilized, I don't know, civilized monkey
right.
Californians or something. But they're not, right? It's like the one, I don't know, she gave them these like silly names, like Blossom and Jerry or whatever.
Right.
It's like, oh, like Jerry is dismembering his childhood friend Carl, and, masturbating with his organs and raping his mother, and, right.
Mm.
And so I think Jane Goodall, and again, this wasn't public knowledge for a long time.
This particular experiment.
Yeah, I mean, it was like the 60s and 70s, but I don't think I think it was called the Gombe Chimpanzee War. And, she was witnessing all these other atrocious things, like
Mm,
female chimp serial killers that would like systematically murder other mothers' children
mm,
and then bully the mothers, like using their children's corpses and stuff.
mm,
So she was witnessing things that she just couldn't really process, because again, she was coming from this perspective of like, oh, chimps are cute, friendly beings. They seem kind of like us, right?
mm.
But then they're, waging war, mutilating children, killing their friends. Like what's happening here, right?
Mm.
Um, so and by the way, this also goes for the bonobo chimps, which get very romanticized, but they're also quite violent, and it's not clear that they actually behave less violently than the other kinds of chimps. Maybe a little bit, but they're certainly
They
not.
just have better PR.
I guess, yeah, they seem to have better PR for whatever reason, but there's still reports of massive, violence and other, mutilating children and
Mm,
all that fun stuff. So it's not clear that the reproductive cycle or life or just general life cycle of these chimps can be separated from some kind of warfare death drive element, including how they like normally like interact or just mate, right? So and if that's true for chimps, then I mean, what does that say about us, right? Because like we are kind of chimps, right? We're like 99% the same thing. So that would
Interesting.
certainly seem to explain a lot, because again, we always literally do exactly the same thing. Like once the country gets big enough, there's separatists,
Right.
and then there's a war,
Right.
and then there's like a baby boom at some point. So are we just playing out the same thing? Is one way of looking at it. So in that situation, so presumably no amount of knowledge or awareness is going to change that. So you could be as aware of it as you want, and it's still going to play out exactly the same way, right? So Freud and I think he was writing this in a letter to Einstein, and again, they still had these very kind of romantic views of like enlightened men of reason were gonna lead us out of this dark age, and
Right.
like to what, like what were they gonna lead these beings to that would replace that, I guess.
Yeah, I'm just trying to digest if awareness could stop it. Like, I mean, I see this play out like in my own life where, like trying to fix posture, for example, like it becomes like a practice of constantly becoming aware of your posture, right? But then you're just aware of how bad your posture is, right? You're constantly waking up to sitting in the wrong position or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But over time, does that, like, it seems to correct it over time, right? Like,
well, I mean, there is some, I mean, there's evidence certainly that overall human violence has been decreasing over the past, I don't know, 50, 60 years or so, compared to the past. So, I mean, there obviously are still ongoing military conflicts and, genocide kind of activities, but that we're seeing now in real time. But compared to the past, it seems relatively less warfare.
so I guess the question is has like overall life decreased as well, basically?
Well,
right?
In some, I mean, the overall human population is massively more than it was in the past. But again, is that going to stay that way? Because Japan is crashing, Korea is crashing,
China,
a
I
lot
think as well, right?
Yeah, China will be too. A lot of the Western countries as well. So yeah, is that what's going to happen?
The date I saw was for Japan. They said 2034 is basically
Right.
like the
Ground zero population
ground zero, I guess. Is that
break
the
or
right
something. I
term?
don't know
Yeah,
what.
but like basically it needs to be corrected before then, or else like then that's the point of no return, basically.
Well, these are very difficult questions, because it's sort of like the French Revolution in a way, because I think that was the first point where they, like, on kind of a national level, they're like, we're going to run things entirely rationally, using human reason to, overthrow tyranny, superstition, monarchy,
Right.
nobility, religion, right? Pretty radical propositions at the time. Because again, if you probably asked someone a few hundred years earlier, like, what are the most important things in life, they would have said exactly that: monarchy, religion,
Right.
tyranny in a national sense. I mean, it was feudalism, faith rather than reason, all kinds of, very different way of looking at it. And how did the French Revolution turn out? Well, I mean, it was certainly massacre piled on massacre, public executions constantly, violence, chaos, literal statues to goddesses of reason. So are you like, how are you really, is this really what is, it's like you think you're going to go to, like I don't know, Muppets show, and it turns out to be like a death metal band or something, right? It's like, is this really what it's billed as? Because it certainly doesn't seem like it. Seems like another kind of tyranny, another kind of insane, violence and unleashing of the death drive.
Yeah, just kind of got like transfigured.
Unleashed in an incredible form, which again, guillotines and just people rocking up to see, heads rolling everywhere. So, I mean, it was an incredible, I guess, libidinal explosion of various human drives, which marketed itself as something completely different, but kind of wasn't. So, is it possible to reroute drives? Because again, they're not really desires. They're
reroute. Yeah.
Well, can you? I guess like
the French Revolution did reroute it, right?
Well,
but
it did, but in a way that resulted in a catastrophic explosion, which was.
So the point is the drive is still there, even if you divert it into some other direction, basically.
Can't you actually, is it always going to just only do one thing? Like, does the death drive, is it always the same thing, and does it only do one thing? Because if it is, and it does, then can there be progress? Because in a way there sort of can't be, because it's just only always going to play out exactly the same way, no matter how you dress it up, or no matter how you explain it away or rationalize it. And like the rationalizations are kind of irrelevant to how it plays out in practice.
Right. Yeah.
So could you reroute it into, I don't know, like playing Fortnite or something, or
just distraction,
collecting,
right?
I don't know, figurines or something. Like, could you, well, I mean, these are real questions, right? What can you do with it, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're not going to have a military, if you're not going to have a religion, if you're not going to have, I don't know, big families or something, like what are you going to do with these humans, right? Because that's what they tend to do, right? So what are you going to do with them?
It's a good question.
I mean, I guess you could distract them. I mean, it's sort of what we see in Japan and a lot of the West too. I mean, you could just waste their attention and time just with
algorithms and
I mean, you could. I guess you could mentally keep them constantly occupied with nonsense that doesn't really give them time to do anything.
Is that the death drive actually being expressed?
Maybe it might be. It might be.
Algorithm.
I mean, it might be a kind of death drive, or anti-life drive. So again, trying to redirect it might just be expressing it in a kind of shitty way.
Right.
Much like in the tarot, like if you try to repress death, then you end up with, death reversed, which is kind of even worse, right? So trying to repress or not deal with these energies can kind of end up worse in a way.
That kind of reminds me, I was walking through the train station last night, and like stopped in the middle of like the hallway in the corridor. There's a guy, like kind of older guy, but bent like way over. You know how they have that sort of like I don't know, arthritic posture or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm like, is he okay? And then I like look, and in his hand he has a smartphone.
Right.
He's just going through reels.
He's just like looking at reels.
Yeah, just looking at just
randomly.
like in the middle of the hallway, right? Just completely captivated by some like close up of food being prepared or whatever.
Just watching random cooking videos or something. Yeah.
With like that like old man, like, you know how they don't know how to use a touch screen, where they have to like very deliberately swipe at it like it's a newspaper or something. I don't know.
It's like focusing the manual process on it.
Yeah. Just 2024 in a nutshell, I suppose, in Japan.
Yeah. So the traditionalists are in a rough position too, because easy answers aren't really what I don't think like the easy answers of, you know, traditionalism or conservatism are really gonna catch hold that much, at least for most of the world.
What traditional points rather? I didn't really follow the idea.
Well, I mean, just, you know, go back to having big families, and, you know, wife and mom stays home, and, you know, trying to run some kind of, I don't know, 1940s simulation or something.
Yeah. Whole thing doesn't work though, right? It's just like you can't go back, basically.
You can't really go back. At least not in that way. I mean, there might be some other configuration or something, but I certainly don't think it's going to look like much like the past, certainly at this point.
Well, on that note, looking forward to the future.
Looking forward to the future, or the immediate future before 2034, was it? Was the
2034?
Is that the crisis point?
10 years.
So we got 10 years of 10 years of good times until total population collapse.
Yeah. I wonder what that would look like.
Well, in the John Maynard Keynes Keynesian economics essay from 1930, he said in 100 years or less, the economic problem, which is presumably the problem of any kind of labor directed to scarcity, will be solved completely. So all we have to do is hold out 6 years, and then all economic problems will vanish, right?
It's the funny thing is it could very well be possible, which is bizarre.
Yeah. I hope that's the case. I mean, it'd be nice to just sit around chilling and having fun while I don't know, machines carry on labor or something.
Yeah, that's the dream, right?
It's the dream. So only 6 more years.
Only 6 more years
until the economic problem is solved.
But in the meantime, listeners, please solve our economic problem.
Please solve our economic problems.
Please join us on Patreon.
Join us on Patreon.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a comment, support us.
Please sign up.
See you in the next one.
Peace out. Good night.